an American where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me, and I gladly stand up.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Jesse Berger. I'm chairman of Harnett County's Republican Party right now, and I'm very fortunate to have with us former Senator Ron Rabin, one of the true last remaining American patriots in our area. So thank you so much for taking your time to be with us, Ron. I know a lot of folks know you, but one of my objectives here is that by posting these things on YouTube, I'm trying to get the younger generations involved. And so as a prerequisite, if you could just give us some of your introduction, tell us a little bit about your past, your history, and all the things that you've accomplished in your years on this earth.
Well, I don't know that I've accomplished a lot, but I've been around for a long time. On the 14th of May, a couple of weeks from now, my wife, Mona, who's been suffering with me for 52 years now, is throwing a big bash for my 90th birthday, which really means that I have seen roughly live and in color, full color and multidimensional, about 1/3 of our nation's history. So when people start throwing revisionist history at me, I'm saying, well, wait a minute, I was kind of there. And I know that isn't what was. It's particularly true now with some of the stuff that we're going through with regard to World War II and some subsequent actions, beyond that. On the World War II issue, the biggest lesson from history that we should have is one of my colleagues on the Senate floor one time got up and started talking about he had some friends who happened to be Japanese. Okay. By the way, folks, anybody watching this, all I do is just say it straight out. You can take with it what you want. Anyhow, he stood up and he talked about his friendship with the Japanese. I thought that was well and good, not a problem. But then he said, maybe we should start thinking about apologizing for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And with that, I came right up out of my chair and said, no way. Now, it's easy to come up with an idea like that when you haven't been through. I was 9 when World War II started, 14 when it ended. All of the news that came at us was positive. All of the things that we wanted to do were save the world from a bunch of murderers. I mean, they were not good people. Okay, whatever people think was their motivation, the Japanese to attack Pearl Harbor, notwithstanding, whatever reason, Adolf decided to go ahead and side with them and take us on, not a problem. What I do know is that totalitarian regimes controlled by oligarchies and big government invariably mean that as the government grows in any nation that I'm aware of, from the beginning, you can go back to King Tut if you want to. As the nation grows, the bureaucracy grows, and the regulations begin. Once you get into a big government mode and a bigger government mode, then you end up with, I've used this before when I talk to folks on the road. As government grows, your personal freedoms shrink because regulation after regulation after regulation comes out of the tubes. We are being regulated right now more than by an ever-growing government. I mean, it's growing exponentially. But with side issues on this whole issue of what the heck really is censorship, as soon as you start impinging on free speech, like all that's going on right now with Elon Musk and the buying of Twitter and all the liberals are, yeah, look at what's going to happen now. We're going to read your history and get it right. Fascism was begun by liberals. Benito Mussolini invented fascism, okay? Mussolini was a Marxist going in. He just said he would grow government because government was the most important thing in his universe, and everything else was secondary, which means personal freedoms go down. The important issue is it starts with the left, not the right. When you call someone a fascist because they're conservative, you're blowing smoke. You don't know what you're talking about. Then along came Adolf, and he came up with this national socialism. Nazi stands for National Socialism. I want some genius out there to explain to me National Socialism and Democratic Socialism. What are you talking about, guys? You are talking about big government control. And then you can go down through Stalin, all of those recent things on the stage of history. Okay. So you end up with less freedom because of what the left has done. Does anybody think Stalin was a conservative? No, he was a Marxist. That's liberal, guys. That's where you're going. Unfortunately, the wrong story gets put out. Okay. And now there's a sort of a suffering of all of that going on. That's ridiculous. We have uh, back to World War II. World War II was not won anyhow because of the A bombs at Nagasaki and Hiroshima, or because we had a bigger army with more guns, more bullets, more tanks, more airplanes, and more of everything else. It was won because the American people were absolutely unified against this enemy. There was no quarter given. Unconditional surrender did not mean you stop or I'm going to spank your hands or something. It meant it's a done deal. Either you quit or you're dead. People just can't get used to the idea that war, because of the kind of toys you're playing with, is a very deadly operation. So it was unity that got us through that. The way things have been going of recently, especially, is more and more divisiveness, dividing us against each other. That's absolutely asinine. I am not going to worry about anything. CRT is divisive, okay? The other one, 1649, is divisive, setting us against each other at a time when unity is what we need, because the world ain't stable. And you got these guys in China looking to knock us right up. They may have already knocked us right off the top of the pile. If you think being second or third or being part of an international, when you start getting international thoughts in your mind, oh, the UN is a good thing. One of the best things that happened with the UN we didn't take advantage of, when Gaddafi was still alive and in power, after Reagan bombed him and he said, whoops, I'm going to quit sending terrorists around the world. He said, well, maybe it's time for the UN to come from New York to the Middle East and I'll pay for it. And we weren't smart enough to say, okay. The UN is not pro-America, okay? Globalists are not pro-America. When you start doing things that are not pro-America, you start doing things that erode our national power. The reason you want national power is you've got to have, why do people come together? And the sociological textbooks will tell you, basically, once the basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, and all are met, the next thing is security. People come together for common good and security. You can't get that when you're divided. That's when the clashes start and things have to change.
So I'd like to jump in real quick. There's two different areas of this that I feel like should be expanded upon. The first one, I'd like to hear from your military experience and everything that you did in the military, how that kind of shaped some of your mindset, because I've spoken with a lot of our current elected officials and business leaders and whatnot, and there's this attitude of, I have to plan everything out. I have to set everything up just so, and then we have to follow all these rules just so. But for me, coming from the infantry, coming from airborne specifically, we were told, yeah, you're going to get dropped in here and all hell is going to break loose and you're going to have to figure it out.
The amount of detail and planning on the military side, when you start with the overall operational thing, I mean, I would be willing to bet that the operational directives and the total operational plan for the invasion of Europe would stack as high as the room I'm sitting in right now. But as it comes down to the riflemen, which is where I look at the whole world as an infantry problem, okay, a problem-solving process.
Absolutely.
You can't help but be that way. You first got to recognize the problem or the mission, you know, and then you go from there. Without planning, if you don't plan on where you're going, you don't know where you're going to get to. That's almost like Yogi Berra would say it. You know, if you come to a fork in the road, take it. Well, you know, it's just one of those things. You have to have a plan. Planning requires that you know something about what you're doing. Okay, and planning to me is planning can be a group process. Okay, we'll go to the military example of the command and staff process, which I'm quite familiar with. Okay, the unit gets a mission, commander looks at it, calls the staff together, said, here's the mission, here's what I think. The commander's overview of what might play out. Go do your number. They come back and they say, here's how we accomplish the mission. The commander has to decide which parts to put in that plan. And it's the responsibility for decision that gets most people all agog today. If you ain't willing to stand up and be responsible for what you decide, either personally or for a company, then get out of the game. Our biggest problem today is lack of, one of our biggest problems that I see from that 90-year perspective is the lack of acceptance of personal responsibility for where you're at. Everybody sitting down, anybody listening to this, you and me, are sitting where we are or listening because of decisions we make. There are all kinds of inputs to that and all kinds of pressures. But in the end, if you decide that it ain't cool to learn to read, you ain't going to be able to read. And when you want to be a brain surgeon, you can't be, okay? It just doesn't work that way. You have got to prepare yourself with either education or skill training, whatever it is you want to do, I don't care which, or you can move to the next level, or else you're forever going to be sitting there saying, who's going to give me something so I can get by for the week? We just can't continue this way.
And to continue to expand on that, you know, one of the things that I feel like has been happening and I've observed, folks in an effort to abdicate their own personal responsibility will try and rest their entire argument off of, well, I had these PhDs do a study. Well, I had, you know, this university provide this study. And yet those same PhDs that are supposedly brilliant are the same ones coming out saying, oh yeah, boys can be girls and girls can be boys. So at what point in time do we start looking at these folks and saying, look, people are people, no matter what your degree is, no matter what you have as a title, you're still a person and people respond to incentive structures. So if we've created an incentive structure that creates false information or poor information, how can we now use that to rely on? And more importantly, what can we do as individuals to have that personal responsibility that starts with me, not with I'm resting my entire belief system off of, you know, someone else's research.
Well, one of the things that's happened over the 90 years is that the very best offset to the you are responsible sort of an idea is the erosion of the family. We now have a bunch of organizations, and I mean, it's not that they're not well intended, don't misunderstand, doing what the family used to do. I've been working on some Someone on the Facebook said something the other day, and say, what you're talking about is you want this organization to do what families used to do before it got so like it is.
Mhm.
That's part of it. I think that that's a big part of it. That family responsibility, the propaganda that comes out, and it does come from the left. I don't care what anybody says. That erodes the church, that erodes the family, that erodes all kinds of things, because it's, we got a great case going right now that's happening today. The Supreme Court said it should never have passed Roe v. Wade. It didn't say that they were against abortion, which is what, I mean, today, what we really got was the October surprise, except they didn't wait till October. They put it out now with this, whoever the, I can't think of a word that I can use publicly to describe what I think of the person who leaked that report out of an institution as enduring and as important as the Supreme Court, just for political gain. That's all it's about. Politics has gotten to be such a big part of everything we do that the greater good for the greater number is one of those things. That's the constitutionality. The Constitution says, I'm in charge, not you guys. Okay. That this whole thing will play out in a different kind of a way. And the Supreme Court said it's up to the state. Well, my goodness, you want to get back to the idea that power is not delegated, not taken by, are delegated to the states to do. There's something in the Constitution about that I can't quote, but I know it's there. So
Yes.
come on, guys, let's start getting real about this stuff. Why do we have people smashing and grabbing or just walking out of stores with $900 worth of stuff? If it ain't against the law, people are likely to do it. Sometimes they do a lot of stuff that's against the law just because they want to. But when you open those doors and say, no penalties, you're not going to get punished, it's society's fault. No, the person who can't earn a living has made a decision to do something else besides earn a living or prepare to earn a living. Individual responsibility, family input. Most of the time, from what I can see from the data that I see, most of the perps don't have a great family grounding, okay? And that's, I feel sorry for them, and we should try to do that. But you can't do it, and that you can't do nothing, but if you do something, you got to be careful what you do and what you plant, what seeds you plant, and how it comes out.
In obviously you've experienced this for a lot more decades than I have, but even from when I first joined the military, we had what was called wall-to-wall counselings, and then that slowly went away. And I didn't grow up here in the States. I grew up in a third world country in Turkey. I didn't move to the States until I was 12. So a lot of my cultural experiences have been different. But when I talk with older folks, I'm reminded of even some of my own high school, middle school experiences in Turkey, where if there was a problem, you got up and you solved that problem. Sometimes it meant, you go out back behind the school building and, the two dudes that are having a problem, they throw fists. And then at the end of it, you shake hands and walk away. But it seems like we've removed that aspect of masculinity because we've vilified all aspects of violence instead of saying, no, there's an appropriate time. And that's what you have to learn, is the timing, not making a blanket statement that something's totally wrong. So I'm just curious what you've seen over your years of that.
I think that the issue you're describing, at the core of that, is the idea that Mona and I talk about this sometimes, that, we should never have raised our kids according to Dr. Spock, not the guy with the pointy ears, but the one who wrote the book, because that's when we began to get away from the idea that the only way to teach good habit is to um, sanction bad doing. Okay, and sometimes you have to do that physically. That's all there is to it. Some people learn, some don't. Now, I don't think that there were, like, in earlier America, I know that there were guys like Capone and all that. There were aberrants. There's always going to be aberrants, but you can't go ahead and say we have to treat everybody this way because that works out. And I think the problem with a lot of the academics, I did two master's courses in psychology. I'm just dangerous enough when I get going on that subject to have at least a modicum of understanding. The instructor asked me, I did it at Leavenworth when I was not in jail, but at Command and General Staff College. And after it was over with, the professor, when the school year was over, he got me aside and I can remember his name, Dr. Gustafson. I don't know why I remember something that long ago, but I enjoyed the classes. I enjoyed learning. He said, I made good grades. And he said, he understood the problem. What he could never understand about me, as opposed to other folks in that class who were all military because of where we were, was that I never really argued against some of these psychological phenomena that were described and talked about. And I had already commanded a battalion in Vietnam when I was back, and I had also been after my second Vietnam tour. They sent me to Leavenworth to learn to command a battalion after I commanded a battalion. Is what it really amounts to.
Army
Anyhow,
logic.
I said, Dr. Gustafson, it works like this. I said, I have seen all of these behavioral phenomenon happen. I have nothing to argue with. The question is, how can you use it to make things better?
Mm-hmm.
Like a great class, and it's going on right now, but one of the old Skinner movies that they showed, okay? And they had 7 or 8 people sitting in chairs, and they had one non-initiate, and 6 or 7 of them were Confederates to the experiment. And then the guy got up and he showed a chart pack, and there were 2 lines on that chart pack. One was obviously longer than the other. They put the subject at one end and they started at the other end, and they were told to say that they were the same size. And by the time it went through just 7 iterations, the person on the end said they're the same size. When you could see observing the film that they were not the same size. Those kind of things, that's how propaganda controls really. You tell the story long enough, and away you go. We're being, this whole thing with, I cannot believe that the United States of America, at the White House level, at the highest levels of our government, actually is putting in a disinformation governance board, and people are accepting that kind of crap. Okay? When you start destroying free speech, you start destroying, for sure, the United States of America. I have every right to have an opinion different than yours, and vice versa. Doesn't mean we're enemies. It just means we see it differently. But when you start having the government say that's right and that's wrong, that's not fact checking. That's opinion bouncing. That's part of that in itself is disinformation. Disinformation is political correctness. All of these things that impinge on our First and Second Amendment rights are absolutely they are juxtaposed to being able to have a free, open, equal opportunity society, because it keeps eroding and eroding. Yeah. You mentioned the military. The current military, when you have the Popinjay in charge, like Milne, and he says he's going to have diversity and equity challenge excellence and excellence of performance just to give people a chance. He's toying with life and death on the battlefield. It is absolutely wrong. The military must be a meritocracy. I don't mind diversity, everything else equal. That's, I watched that one. But don't you ever tell me that you don't want, I will ask everyone who listens to this tape who have kids or grandkids, do you want your progeny to go to war and be shot at and have to react in that kind of an environment without having the very, very best leadership possible, selected because they got their stuff together and not scattered all over the street? Okay. When you tell me you want second tier who are given an opportunity just because for some reason, no, not in the military. It cannot be that way. It must be a meritocracy. Now, there are gonna, everything in the world's on a bell curve. There are going to be, at the 6 and 7 sigma extensions of the curve, things that go wrong. But in the main, to have the most effective and functional military in the world, equality and excellence have to be the mantra of what you do in the system. Anyhow, now that I've made more enemies, I can go on. That one really gets me. They're cuckoo clocks when you start using the military as a social engineering tool. You are eroding the national security of the United States of America, and I'll challenge anybody on national TV to a debate on that freaking issue. Anybody.
So I'd like to continue on with some of what you were just discussing with the psychology. So my background in the military, I was infantry first, and then I was in PSYOP. One of the things that I believe that we're looking at, and this was kind of some of the premise of what I mentioned earlier about basing your opinions off of these PhDs that are coming out with their opinions on stuff. But for those that aren't familiar that are watching this, there's something called the Milgram experiments. I'm sure you're aware of it, Ron, but the Milgram experiments were conducted after World War II in an effort to understand, were Germans actually evil people, or what caused these folks to commit the atrocities? And in the experiment, what they did is they had a test subject. They had a person in a lab coat, and then there was another person behind a glass screen that was part of the experiment as well. And it was a simple experiment. The test subject would ask a question. If the person behind the glass got it right, they would move on to the next one. If they got it wrong, they would zap them with electricity and increasing voltages until they got to the very end. Out of everyone that did the experiment, and my numbers are going to be off because I'm going off of memory, but it was over 80% of people were willing to give not just a lethal dose of electricity, but continue even after nothing was happening, because they were abdicating their personal responsibility on the lab coat that said anytime they would, they'd zap the person, and all of a sudden they don't hear anything, and the subject saying things like, "Hey, I think there's something wrong. We need to go check on them." And the person in the lab coat would just say, "The experiment requires you continue," and that's it. And the majority of people were willing to go beyond just killing. So with all of that said, I'm curious as to how we can identify, I guess, truths from fiction when we know that people will subject themselves to the repeated lie, like you said, 7 iterations, and then all of a sudden you're believing it, or having that proposed authority, in the lab coat.
That's what makes this issue of censorship and misinformation and disinformation. Like I know just enough about PSYOPs from being an SF to know that he who speaks first speaks the truth. Okay. And once you plant the seed, reversing the process, the arguing against it becomes absolutely horrendous in terms of effort. It's like a 10-to-1 ratio in effort. One saying, here's the output, and then takes 10 times as much effort to push it back to reality. If you keep telling folks that it's okay, like they did in that experiment, or they have, if they don't have the knowledge base to, or the personal, if they don't sense this idea that, hey, that's wrong, they have to have the concept of right and wrong to begin with. And that again stems from that, from the grassroots up. You don't go into the booth to take that experiment with a blank slate. Especially, well, it would have, speculating, it would have especially been true in post-war Germany, where they had already been nationally brainwashed to do whatever the Fuhrer said do. That was a sort of a macrocosm of the problem I see coming our way if we keep not getting the truth out there. Revisionist historians have a lot to do with the erosion of this. I think they're one of my pet peeves. I think it's absolutely wrong to judge someone for something they did 150 years ago if they did it within the construct of the values of the day, and say that they're bad people. They weren't bad people. They were just people doing what everyone was doing. There was no malicious intent to do wrong. But to go back and say that the founding fathers, as a great example, were bad guys for any issue, I don't care what it is, slavery or whatever, then, you're doing the wrong thing. Thomas Jefferson was probably one of the most educated and best thinkers politically in the history. He ranks in there, as far as I'm concerned, with Plato and Aristotle and those guys, and the real thinkers. That shouldn't change. The goodness that came out of his mind should not be changed and made look bad just for something that was common at the time. The same thing now. You just can't continue to take down statues of great people. What do you have left? Okay. If you start to do that, the nutcases that want to destroy Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
That bite me. That's crazy. When I get, some of this stuff is just nonsensical. And they keep coming out and people keep saying, oh my gosh, and away they go. If we don't fix our education system, this will all be either trash or I will be, put down as one of the worst people in the whole world because I'm speaking honestly about what I think about stuff. And we haven't even gotten to the political world yet. I mean, we're just talking about trying to get along in the world that we're talking about.
Right.
Well,
and I mean, even in,
you can't change history. It's what it is. You go back to your first question, or the one you asked me before we went on air about lessons learned. Mm-hmm. If you change the lesson learned, you ain't learned nothing, Jack. Okay. It's just the way it goes.
Absolutely.
Come on, that's what happens to the lessons, I guess. Heck, I wrote dozens of those when I was in Vietnam the first time. When I went back the second time, do I have time for a short vignette on how these things work?
Yes.
Well, okay. So now we're sitting there one day, first tour, and we had a mech unit with us. We went into the Chupong Yadrang area in all of '66, right after the CAV was in there. We were soldiers once and young and all that. And we had a mech unit with a CAV unit, armor CAV, not air CAV, armor CAV. And their vehicles began to belly up during the wet monsoon. So, click, it goes in the back of my head. We wrote it up, wet monsoon, you better keep your tracked vehicles and your heavy equipment on, either on high ground or on roads. So I went back second time. This is three years later. And I was going to be S3 of a brigade. And I was S2 the first time over for a whole year with one brigade. But this time I go back, I'm going to be the S3. But the S3 was still there. I had about 5 days of overlap to get right into the problem, all that kind of stuff. So I went to the briefings, while I was trying to learn what the situation was and get it all in my head pretty good, because there were no computers. You had to memorize all this stuff. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen if they ever shoot down the satellites. with the GPS. I hope people know how to read a map and
Yes.
understand spatial relationship. Anyhow, so I'm sitting there and I see they've got this tank unit in an area where it was in the Ankh Pass area. And I said, I raised my hand and I said, I don't mean to get involved right now because I know it ain't my job, but the wet monsoon is about on us and those armored vehicles are going to belly up in there and you ain't going to be able to get them out. Well, the enraged tank battalion commander obviously went nuts over that one. And the brigade commander decided to side with him and left him there. Now, you know the end of the story, right?
Yeah.
The lessons learned disappear when you have other people come in who are really smarter than everybody else.
Hmm.
But that, anyhow, that's just one of those things that happened in my life.
Well, kind of segueing, I guess, of that specific point into some of the politics. I had a conversation with someone where we were discussing leadership and different leadership styles, and obviously there's no shortage of books and literature that you can read on leadership. But one of the things that I'm curious as to your opinion on, in the military, orders come from the top down. In a business, orders come from the CEO, and and they dictate their philosophy. But as I read through what our founding fathers intended for our country, that wasn't the intent, from what I can gather. The intent was that we have to trust the people to be able to make the collective right decision, and it is incumbent on us. In fact, it was Thomas Jefferson that said, "If we do not educate the people, we ourselves will become the wolves." So I guess I'm curious as to what your thoughts are in terms of public sector leadership when you're trying to lead the people, and how you should approach that as opposed to the military or maybe enterprise level leadership styles, and maybe some of the crossover lessons that you've learned that have really been valuable as you transition from one to the other.
Well, in my background, one of my assignments was director of the Command Staff and Leadership Department at the U.S. Army Infantry School at Fort Benning, Georgia. And to do that, I had to learn a lot about leadership. I had to study a lot about it. I'll start by saying that one of my NCOs at the time, who had been in the Ranger Battalion and went up on the cliffs over there in Normandy, I was still in that, we still have those guys. He said to me one time that I should have a discussion or something on leadership. And by that time I had learned, I was full colonel and I was lieutenant colonel on promotionless and I got promoted. But I had learned that talking leadership to people who weren't leaders and didn't understand leadership was a fruitless exercise. Okay, leadership, number one, you cannot teach charismatic leadership. That's a function of environment and how you grow up and what happens, even your physical construct. Taller is easier, leaner is better, blue eyes and whatever, it's a few bulging muscles here and there, the way you carry yourself, all of that stuff you just learn by your life experience till all of a sudden, oops, I'm the leader. Leadership, everybody has to find their own style, but they have to be introspective enough based on knowledge to know what they do best. Okay. The charismatic aside, you can become a better leader if you behave in the way other leaders have behaved. Doesn't mean you'll ever be the other one. Traits and principles of leadership that the geniuses chucked out. After Vietnam, the military was blamed for a defeat. How did we get blamed for a defeat when we never lost a battle? That's one of the mysteries of life to me. But the politicians couldn't stand the heat. Okay. They ain't real good at that. I found that out in my second incarnation here. So the Army then, and I don't know, I won't talk to the other military. I don't know what they did. I just know I was right in the middle. I was at the right rank and right in the middle of, I was there when Training and Doctrine Command was born. I know what they were doing to leadership instruction. The behavioral scientists at West Point and a couple of other places had somehow gotten control of the minds of the folks putting TRADOC together, and said that all of the stuff that was being taught by way of traits and principles of leadership was wrong because leadership was non-teachable. They wanted to put it into personnel management, where they did put it. Okay, went into the S1 world rather than the S3 world. But anyhow, during that process, the 4-star general, who was the first commanding general of TRADOC, General Depew, who was in Vietnam, commanded a division in Vietnam, the Big Red One. Anyhow, he came by one time, and because the pressure was there to take the leadership stuff and move it out and make it an integrated subject of all things rather than a driver of instruction, it was all in process. So when he came by for his first visit, I'm director of the Command Staff and Leadership Department and was not on his schedule of stops. But Depew was a very curt, direct guy. So he got through all the other stuff real quick, and they had slack time, called my office and said, could I take him? I said, glad to. So here came William Eugene Depew, General U.S. Army, okay? And I had a briefing room then that had 2 overstuffed chairs with the magic lantern in the middle, the old slideshow thing. And everybody smoked then, so I was smoking. I smoked 2.5 packs a day before I quit.
Jeez.
And General Depew, he didn't care about it because everybody was doing it. And I flipped it on. I said, I got down to it by saying, General, I cannot tell you that I can create charismatic leaders. I cannot do that. I explained why, as I said. I said, but I will tell you that since Sun Tzu, or before, maybe since Cain whacked Abel, I'm not sure, lessons learned have said that there are ways, traits, and principles that tend to typify good leader behavior. If I can put these in the heads of the kids that are coming through our classes, the young officers and young enlisted, because we had both, NCO and officer training at Bennington then. But if I can plant these seeds, and if one of them says, know your men and look out for their welfare, it's one of my favorite ones. If I can plant that seed and they're out in the field, and the officer says, well, has your men eaten yet? It makes a big difference in what happens. If he gets positive feedback, then he's going to internalize the behavior and become a better leader. We can make better leaders by letting them know how leaders behave and not tolerating anti-leadership behavior. I think that the all ranks clubs are nonsense. You cannot have an army that does not have respect for rank, period. You cannot have a good old boys club and all of this other stuff. It's just, I can only speak from what I don't know what, up till I retired. And I don't know what happened in Afghanistan or in Iran or any, those desert operations. I don't know how it worked. I do know that in the best army we ever fielded, the one that fought in Vietnam, and there's documents that prove what I just said. I didn't just say it. Okay. All you got to do is look at some of the data all over the internet instead of the nonsense that the mainstream media puts out. Anyhow, they were of that brand where we kept trying to improve leadership by behavior. And it was reinforced every day. I would confront my officers when I saw them doing something wrong. Heck, I was up we did an insertion one time. We started a new operation. I put the company in. The vision for some reason came out and said, we're gonna not have any boonie hats out there, you know, because steel pots, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. So I put the word out, flying over, and I saw that I saw that some of my subordinate commanders had boonie hats, or men had boonie hats. The way the Army was then, without all the lawyers and bullshit involved, from my observation helicopter, I gave them an Article 32 and an Article 15, and I fined them to put money into their company fund, just like that. Okay. So that they didn't do that. And then I took the next step. I'm not saying I'm just trying to give you things that the way I view the world and why I did some of the things I did. The next part of that episode was I issued an order that all of my officers would put on their shiny brass and not wear subdued brass. I didn't do that. And I go, whoa, what about the snipers? I said, when's the last time a sniper got anybody up here in the Highlands? Well, I don't know. Put the shiny brass on. I didn't do that because I wanted to punish them and get them shot at. I wanted them to remind themselves that they were the leaders, and I wanted their men to be damn sure that they knew that they were the leaders. And that to me was a way to do it. You cannot have a good old boys club. I mean, right now I play golf with a bunch of retired enlisted guys. I have a lot of fun. But when you're talking about combat and you're talking about serious stuff, you don't have time for that. You have only time for do this now. And anybody who doesn't like it and wants to protest, they're done. I mean, that attitude with me started even in Korea. I was in Korea when I was first lieutenant on the DMZ. My unit was up there. I was first lieutenant, but I was a platoon leader because they were trying to figure out if I was really worth a damn or not. I guess they didn't want to make me the XO. So, and I might not have been, I don't know, but we went on a road march. And the first one there, I had been in a soft shoe job. So I got blisters on my feet. And when I got back, the medic came up to fix the blisters for me. And I said, Doc, please remember those blisters. Lock them in. The next time we went, the CO and the XO were on the road, so I was in charge of the march. And I'm walking along, and there's this guy sitting beside the road. I said, you know, we're walking along the DMZ, and it was not undangerous at the time. I said, you know, got to get with us. Oh, no, sir. They had been using an ambulance to transport the guys who got tired.
Boo-boos.
I said, well, okay. I walked off and left them. Left them sitting there, and I didn't have an ambulance. There's an ambulance, or they wanted me to get it. You didn't have a heart attack. You weren't getting an ambulance. And he caught up because in the way I did it, I called the same medic over and I said, Doc, check his feet. If the blisters ain't the same size as mine, he gets up and walks. You have to be willing to do that. And you have to be willing to do that kind of confrontation in real life.
Yes.
If you get a job, if you're elected to a position as mayor, if you're not willing to confront other folks, you can't do your job. You can't keep saying, well, I don't want to do it because he didn't want to do it, or I can't do this. And that's how you get all the sub-optimized solutions, because people will not stand up and say, time out. A lot of times that comes simply because they didn't do their homework to begin with. I guess that was a fair way to get back to leadership is about being decisive, living with the results, and fixing what you did wrong. You know, that's really what it is. It's not a touchy-feely thing. It's a very direct and personal thing right there.
Yeah.
Here's what's going on, do this. And it's because of what you got up here to decide. You don't have time. And I do believe that group decisions are suboptimized. That's part of what's wrong with government right now and with the political world. Everything has to be massaged and screwed with and messed with. And so it comes out as a placebo rather than a solution. Okay.
Right. Well, you know, when it comes to the public sphere with our elected officials, what is your take on what you've seen over the decades of how we've watched the Republican Party come out and say things time and time again, like, oh, well, you know, we just have to compromise a little bit. You know, we always have to compromise. We have to keep the peace. You know, how do you balance the difference between, look, we're not going to let our country be destroyed versus, you know, there's a time for maybe a more soft approach as opposed to that hard line. This is what's got to happen.
It's not hard line. It's just being decisive. Being decisive is not hard line.
So you would say that the folks that have made those compromises are not decisive.
They're not strong leaders.
Fair enough.
Necessarily. If you have to be committed to a solution, if you think that it has to happen this way, and that solution, in order to get someone's vote, you pull out a slat or two of the house. Okay, what have you got left? Okay, and the other thing, one of the things that I think is lost in the whole, we're right now in the, I think I mentioned to you this to you before. The primary is a critical time in elections that very few people pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
You can sit and bitch and moan all you want to about what the guy in the seat did, but if you aren't there to do your homework during the primary season and listen to people and listen how issues are dealt with, and if you don't vote in the primary and then the same person is reelected, you ain't got no bitches coming, fella. It's just the way it is. It's in the end, as long as we can keep a semblance of, if we can get rid of the damn voter fraud and let the real people's real votes count. If we could do that, in the end, what happens is the government works for us. So when we tell it what to do, if we're wrong, we got to take responsibility for what we did and try to get it changed. Okay,
right.
That goes it goes both ways. It's not always the politics. I don't think that my 6 years in the North Carolina Senate changed me from being a military mind to a political mind, but I learned how to understand that other mindset, and it was not easy to live with sometimes. Part of the problem is attacking the critical issues that are there rather than a vote getting issue that doesn't make squat. Okay,
right.
Well, but it looks good. I'll use one example of my own. Okay, I think most people who look at the world right now, except for those in academia, recognize that academia is far left and going lefter. Okay, especially at the prestige universities. They're getting woker and woker. They're getting so woke, eventually they're going to, turn into jelly. I don't know. But, and this would have been 7 or 8 years ago, during my first or second term, right on the cusp of that, and I think it was the first, maybe the second, I filed a bill. I could file any bill I wanted to. Anybody can. And I had set out on the campaign trail, and I was, let me punch reset a minute. I always thought that my job as an elected official was not to do what I thought was best, but to do what the people who put me in office thought they wanted me to do was best. And sometimes they're not exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
I did a lot of show and tells, forums, town hall meetings, so I could try to get a feel for what folks were thinking. And I tried to keep up locally. That's one of the beauties of having a 2-year term. You have to stay tuned in as opposed to a 6-year la la land. Anyhow, I put in a bill that said, I can't remember, either a study would have to be done to determine how, not if, should, maybe if, blah, 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 but how we get ideological diversity back in the classroom in the UNCF system. That bill went right to the bottom of the inbox of the rules chair, never to see daylight. I didn't expect it to, because it takes a lot of intestinal fortitude to put a bill like that forward and suffer the heat you were going to get. I understand it. I didn't condone it, but I don't regret that I put in the bill. Okay. Because people were telling me when I was out there, I just happened to agree with it, that education was way too far left, way too, just, I mean, how can you end up where we are if it wasn't true that it's way too far left? You don't have a president right now. You've got a committee, a country, the greatest, potentially the greatest nation in the world, being run by a committee of left-wing liberal nutcases. It's not that they don't believe what they say. They've just been indoctrinated into these thoughts that are they're not mainstream. You have to focus, like I said, on the bell curve. There are a lot of issues out here that on the right that shouldn't be addressed, and on the left, you don't need, get the middle part right, and you keep the country strong. I look at almost everything that way now. I like it when it helps North Carolina, but the United States of America is, in fact, the shining city on the hill. And if we let the lights go out, the world is screwed. You are going to end up with China controlling everything that happens. We are going to end up the way I see our path growing right now. We are going to end up in Orwell's 1984 if we ain't there already. And this freaking disinformation governance bureau, if that ain't the Ministry of Truth, that I can't think of Smith's first name, Winston Smith, the protagonist in 1984. If that ain't where he worked, in the Ministry of Truth, his job was to take facts and words, burn them and change them every day to fit the narrative that the government wanted, which is what Twitter was doing, which is what Facebook does. To me, that isn't, Facebook and Twitter's hopefully can change the Twitter part. I don't care that the liberal has a voice. I want my voice. I get sick and tired of every time I look at something on Facebook, if the word climate is in there, I get a little pop-up from Facebook telling me about climate change. That's brainwashing. It is subliminal advertising at its rawest when you recognize what subliminal advertising is, and it's all around you. I don't. That's our problem. It is all, disinformation is all around us, and most people don't know how to get at the origin of the truth of the matter. And usually it comes down to just good common sense. That ain't the right thing to do.
And for me, that's, again, like I said, I didn't grow up in the States, so I didn't grow up in this education system. So I think a lot differently than people, even though I look and speak, in English, just like any other American. I believe in talking with people and learning like this, like we're doing right now, because you get to see the true intentions behind someone. And one of the observations I've made in academia, and because I started taking courses, and then I just got fed up with it, because I said, you guys have your head so far up your ass that you think it smells like roses. I mean, you can only study the same thing for so much before you're not really providing much value. So I really appreciate you taking your time and talking with me like this.
Well, if I left anything out, we'll do it again. I'm scanning to see if I missed any of my favorite, shots, but we covered most of them. I'm really concerned for our country, and I'm concerned for our state. We have got to back to the first lesson of World War II. Unity is what makes us strong. We have got to figure out as individuals how to overcome the bullshit and come together and work together to solve the problems. Because they aren't getting solved the way they are now.
Right. Well, and I
They're
couldn't
getting
agree
worse.
with you. And I couldn't agree more with you when you were talking about the families and the importance of it. In fact, I'm reminded of my favorite author, C.S. Lewis, that said the strength of a nation is based on the strength of its families. So
yeah, there's no scientific evidence, but there's plenty of anecdotal evidence that supports what you just said. I'm sure that someone could come up with a numbers game that would show that that's true, but it's just so obvious. You know, part of it is the change in how, when I grew up, when I was growing up, actually I was raised by my grandparents, not by my parents. They were, I mean, back when divorce was unheard of, they were divorced. Back in the dark ages, at I was 7, so 1939 when they got divorced. Anyhow, my family, though, I had a family. My grandparents and one of my uncles lived at home. They raised me and kept me out of any serious trouble. And I found a basketball, and that kept me out of all trouble because I had to make my grades and stay out of trouble to be able to play. That was it. Okay. I don't think if it weren't for basketball, I probably would not have gone to college. It's all I wanted to do. So, you know, that's, in fact, let me talk one more time about leadership, okay, and that the way that it works. My senior year, a guy came in from another school that was high profile, all city, blah, blah, blah. We got out and we were practicing, and then we went and played a road on the game. And I found out later that there was negatives coming from this guy to try to undermine my status as being the guy. Okay, I was on that team. Anyhow, coach called me in and he said, "Ron, you really want to play and win?" He said, "I have this problem." He said, "Do you realize that if in the middle of the game you stopped and took a dump in the middle of the floor, the other 4 guys would do the same thing?" And I didn't know then what he was saying. But the first person I called when I got to be a colonel was him. He had forgotten the story, and I had remembered it. Okay, the leader is responsible for all the unit does or fails to do, and you better accept it if you need.
Well, I think one of the biggest issues that we're facing nationally, maybe even globally, is it's not global warming, which is nonsensical. The issue is actually our decline in birth rate and the fact that we are below the sustainable levels. And this year, actually, we have a higher reported death rate than there are births. So we're losing more people on the planet than we're gaining. And I base that off of prosperity. I believe that when people are in a good position, they're more inclined to have children.
Until now, Sanger won that battle. I can't think of her first name. That's why your birth rate is down in some areas.
Yes. I'm trying to remember her first name. Oh,
can't think of it right now.
Oh, that's going to drive me nuts.
Wilson, Sanger, FDR. FDR was one of the biggest communists ever. Well, big government guys. I don't know. He was. FDR did a lot of good stuff, all things considered. But you have to recognize that he was an admirer and copier of Mussolini and got great press from Hitler until they declared war on us.
Well, you know,
it's tough.
I mean, I think honestly, I think everyone,
he was the start of the big government.
Yeah.
He was the Start of it was Wilson. He wanted it. But when FDR got the chance, he blew it out exponentially. That was the big, but there you are.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, one of my observations lately has been that good people can make bad decisions all the time, and there's no such thing as steady, like you just go on a straight path. Things go cyclical, so you can be making right decisions at one point and wrong at the next. And I find that a lot of that oftentimes is based on your vantage point, which is why there's plenty of current officials that obviously we're still in the primary, so I can't say names, but there's plenty of people where I disagree with them vehemently on their entire viewpoint from which they're trying to solve the problems. But I think that based on their viewpoint, they're probably doing the best job that they possibly could, and I respect that.
No, there's our decisions. Nobody else will do it for us, but we have to keep our own lessons learned up here. But I have no problem with decisions I disagree with, or if you make a decision that knowing that I disagree with it going in, I don't really care, as long as we get a chance to talk about it first.
Absolutely.
But there's a lot of stuff going on that hopefully we'll get it squared away. But I don't know, this October surprise in April or in May might really change things a little bit. I would be careful. I did a small post on this one. Let's not count our chickens. This may not be a red tsunami.
Right.
This even reinforces that, because you can tend to get a little bit complacent. Okay, if we get complacent, we ain't going to get that majority. And I hope that in the end, if we do get the majorities we need, that the focus isn't on the vendetta kinds of investigations. I really just don't care. I don't see Hillary ever going to jail. There's no sense wasting more resources on it. I don't see Hunter Biden going to jail. I see all of this. Let's focus on fixing education, focus on fixing our economy, focus on things that are important to the United States of America, not to political ends.
Well, you know, when you were talking about your story in Vietnam, when you reprimanded your subordinate commanders and then made them wear their shiny brass, to me, in my current position, I feel like the most important thing we need to do is highlight what actual patriots are. And I feel like we've lost that. I feel like we've gotten to the point where we highlight someone that's wealthy, or maybe finds success in business, or you know, is a movie star, you know, an entertainer, or gets paid millions of dollars to throw a ball through a hoop. I love basketball too, but I'm sorry, I don't think that they should be getting paid that much. And I do feel like, and this is my bias coming out, but I do believe that those of us that have deployed, those of us that have defended our country overseas, those of us that have watched our friends slaughtered in front of us, have a higher level of care to the decisions that are being made, because we know that life and death consequence that can come from it. And it's not a game. At least it's not to me.
Not only do we know the life and death consequences of that, we also have seen what the rest of the world looks like. We've been there and seen the kinds of what here would be considered abject poverty is pretty good living in some of these places.
Oh yeah.
And we know that we have what we have because of our Constitution and because of our freedom. The real successful person in business to me is the small business guy who scrapes it together and makes it work. Once you get to a certain level, you might could lose a couple of gazillion dollars like Musk did on the Twitter thing, but it doesn't even hurt. It doesn't even matter. It's
right.
You fix things. But the way it's kind of like the family is the root of our goodness, Our economy's roots are in small business, not in big business. Anyhow,
No, I love it. This is like I said, this is great. I'd like to give you a wild card question just to kind of close us out here, but
no sweat.
As I mentioned before we started recording, one of the things that's very concerning to me is the transfer of knowledge and ensuring that we don't lose it. And we've seen this through history. I mean, we have huge examples and small examples. We've got things like the pyramids where we're like, we still don't know how they did that. We think we know, but it's all hypothesis because we lost that knowledge. And so if you want to just, as much time as you want, what lessons do you feel like are the most important lessons? I know that we're probably going to have to relive them anyways, but I'd like to be able to have something, especially since this is recorded and it's on record and I can personally come back and review it. What are the most important things that you feel need to get passed on to the next generations?
Personal responsibility. Learn to accept the fact that you are the one responsible for your destiny. That's number one. Number two, all of us are different genetically. Genetics gives us our innate capability. Education gives us the ability to do. The capability might be there, but if you don't get your butt educated, you can't activate the seeds that are there. You can't be a brain surgeon just because you're genetically endowed with the capability to be one. You can only be a brain surgeon if you go to school and go through the loops you have to go through to get to be that. Integrity is to be very important. Polonius said it really, really great to Laertes from Hamlet, okay? Above all else, to thine own self be true. If you can't look yourself in the mirror every day and say, I did the best that I could for me, for my family, and for my country, then maybe you better rethink what you're doing. Maybe you better look at it a different way. I don't know how these things those are sort of the keys to me. I don't know how that would translate into, I think if you take those things and ball them up and use them at the right time, maybe you won't take the lethal dose of fentanyl that's coming your way. Maybe you won't take the extra oxycodone that's coming your way. It's that the ability to say no to peer pressure. But it comes from, I think, the other parts of that. And, those are basically the keys. I just chalk mine up to good genes, good luck. Don't let yourself worry. I never had a life plan. I just reacted to the situation as it was. Like I said, I would never have gone to college had it not been for basketball. But the first college I went to, I flunked out of because I could find the gym, but I couldn't find the classrooms. So now, just to get to the decision part, how little decisions done like that change your life. So now I go home. I had taken my pre-induction physical. This was during the draft, and I was waiting to get drafted, really. And my job at the time was painting sidewalks and crosswalks and stuff on the street. So, job with the city. And as I'm going down painting a crosswalk or painting one of the center lines, a friend of mine who was a year ahead of me in high school came by. And so we're going next to each other at a walking pace because we had to pushing the lawnmower to do that. He said, "What are you doing, Ron?" And I gave him the smart ass answer that you might think I did. Painting the streets here. And he said, "Well, why don't you come down to the University of Alabama with me? Because we need basketball players." Now I'm pushing the machine and he's driving, holding up traffic. I said, when are you leaving? He said, Wednesday at 8 in the morning. I said, okay, pick me up. I went from flunking out of the school, being told I could never get into ROTC, making that decision at that time, just I don't know why, that put me back in school, back on a basketball team, back in ROTC. And you never know when these life-altering situations are going to happen, okay? Deciding to move here. If I hadn't moved here when I did and been sitting here one night when a couple of folks came knocking on the door 10 days before we had to register, okay? Knock on the door, and they said, would I mind running for the Senate? Until that time, until they asked that question, I never considered anything in politics for me, ever. It was not, if I had a 10 thing bucket list, it would have been number 11. Yeah, I mean, way out there. I looked at, we're sitting in the living room, it's 9 o'clock at night. I said, what do you think, Mom? You want to? I said, okay. I mean, that's the way, but I knew in each one of the cases, in any case that came up, that I was prepared to do that. I was prepared to play college basketball. Hell, I'd already played on a freshman team and knew it. I knew that I was prepared to do something because I didn't know exactly what the job was like being a state senator, but I knew that being able to make good decisions was one of them. And I knew I had made life and death ones over here. I can't be all bad. Okay. Yeah. So I'm sure that was somewhere subliminally in my head, but be prepared, and chances are those kind of things will happen to everybody. It's just making the decision that hits the right button. That's probably the biggest lesson. You don't be dismayed if you ain't got a plan. I'm not saying don't have a plan. Those who plan most of the time get where they want to go, but if they don't, it's usually sometimes more heartbreaking to them, or spirit breaking. With me, it was simply, I always like to learn. You know, stuff will stay in my head. And so I'm sure that when they said that, well, could I really do that? And I said, well, why not? It's just decision making.
So this is a question I've actually never asked too many people. Actually, I don't think I've asked anyone outside of my little friend and mentorship group, but I'm a firm believer that we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes. And as such, in my businesses, with my employees, with people that I've mentored, I always tell them to pursue failure, because they'll learn confidence and they'll learn to not be broken down by that failure. So I guess two-part question is, do you agree that you can learn more from your failures than from your successes? And again, I mean, you've got a multitude of stories you could pull from, but if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure that you learn more, but you learn at least as much. And usually they're more enduring lessons because you will remember them with more strength than the kind of like I said earlier about the traits and principles. Once you start to behave in certain ways, it's there. It goes on almost automatic. And when you screw up, bingo, it hits you. And I ain't going to do that again. That's the last time I'm going to do that. Like, that's why I don't drink bourbon anymore. I got so sick on it in Alabama, I can't stand the smell. It was a bad decision.
Well, if that's your worst decision in 90 years. I think you're doing pretty good, though, if that's your worst decision in 90 years. Let me tell you what. Well, hey, Ron, I really
I didn't say it was
time.
The worst one. I just said remember.
Oh, well, sure.
Because it was a bad one.
But no, I really do appreciate your time, and I hope that one of the things that we can kind of highlight with this in the same way, going back to your story with your subordinate commanders, make them wear their shiny brass. I hope our military folks will wake up. I hope they'll understand the importance of what's going on. I hope that the community can start truly understanding the sacrifices that were made, not just by those of us that served, but by the families that supported us the whole time as well. So I'm hoping we can reshift that.
I just looked at my dashboard and realized I never put on the record button. Will you send me a copy of this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna post this on YouTube.
That's a mistake I won't make again.
No, I'm gonna post this on YouTube and it'll be available. So
Gosh darn it, I meant to do that. Actually, what I want to do for when the kids are here for that thing on the 14th, I want them to hear this.
Absolutely.
If they want to, the grandkids and the kids. Kids got to figure out why I was such a mean old guy when I was raising them. The grandkids, they don't know about that. Well, actually, I got great grandkids coming.
Oh wow, that's awesome! Congratulations.
Oh, well,
we'll see if I live that long. Which, by the way, I would like to tell the audience that despite our age difference, you know, we both have that infantry background, and I just want to say that despite our age difference, despite the fact that you're significantly older than I am, and you've gone through a lot more, and your body's physically gone through a lot more, you still kick my ass every time we play golf. So
it's really, I still play. I play 5 days a week, and each day is for a different amount of money, and it makes my day when I can walk away with some of the money I put in. I'm just, most will call it blessed. Genetically, for some reason, I'm still able to hit the golf ball with fair authority. I'll get little quirks in my swing. My head will come up, but for the most part, I can hit it. As long as I'm concentrating right, I can hit it. And I'm lucky that I can go watch a game of golf, let alone go play.
Yeah, sure.
Come right down to it. Anyhow, yeah. Well, all the guys I play golf with will be there at the party also, and you can ask them how much I bitch and moan about bad checks.
Will do. Well, hey, Ron, I really appreciate your time. I really, really appreciate everything that you've done for this country. You know, I know that right now there's a lot of folks in my peer group, especially in the military, that are still active duty, that have become disheartened and disenfranchised with our country. But folks like you and the things that you've done really brings that pride back for me. And I really appreciate
that. Tell those guys for me that I can understand why they're disheartened and all that, but they're still doing the most important job that we have, protecting what we have long enough for it to get better. If the good guys give up and only the guys who volunteer to so they can get pregnant and so they can get more money and all that, I don't want them anyhow. They'll fold in combat, they'll quit.
Mm-hmm.
But the guys who really understand that this nation will not exist long without good people who love their country, are willing to put their boots on the ground and go after the bad guys. That's what we have to have. Don't let them give up on the country. Give up. They can do what they can to change it, but keep it strong as they can. It'll be just like World War II. They had a bunch of the Army then won real great. But as we got it more and more into combat situations, more and more real soldiers, real patriots, real Americans rose to the top. We won. But they have to be there as a nucleus. The guys who love their country have to be there as a nucleus.
Absolutely. Well, the only reason I got involved in the things that I started doing is because of the fact that I'm not okay with my brothers that are still wearing the uniform getting sent out because of some lunatic and their personal agenda. So,
well, this thing in Ukraine that we didn't talk about. I told Mona a month ago that if the mainstream media keeps talking like they're talking and doing what they're doing, we are going to end up fighting on the ground with the Russians. World War III will start.
yep.
Difference now is going to be in World War II, there wasn't any way they could really reach us and do much damage here in Conus.
Yeah.
This time, they have all that they need to take out. I mean, even Fort Bragg is going to be targeted by one of their missiles.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to have a totally different effect. You better be ready. These people, I'm not going to even say that I think anything that Biden's worth of shit on any account. Okay. But the mainstream media, in their efforts to make us think he's a hero, will push us and are pushing us in that direction. It's constant, constant, constant. It started today. That the Supreme Court thing that went on today is the only thing that kept Ukraine off of the screen.
Yep.
But every day it's, and if you think, I got this thought last night and I haven't really worked it out in my head too well, but if you really want to support the Ukrainian people, you'd stop sending all these supplies so the freaking war would stop and the killing would stop. Okay. That's another way to look at that whole problem. I would stop it simply because it's not, the United States of America should never go to war except in its own vital national interests. I do not see vital national interest in the Ukraine. Therefore, we should not be doing that. And I can go either way on the continuing to supply them, but it gets closer and closer and closer to boots on the ground. And if that happens, we have made a serious, serious mistake.
It would appear to me that we're driving in it. Well, this is how I feel about it. I feel as though I'm driving in a car, someone else is the actual driver, and they're telling me that because of their experience and because of their background and because of their pedigree that I need to listen to them. But I feel like I'm watching us drive off a cliff and I'm saying, I don't care about your pedigree anymore. You're wrong, because I can see this with my own eyes.
It's been apparent to me for what maybe I'm overeducated in these kind of I went to the National War College. I'm way out there in South. But this one has all the earmarks, prelude to going to war.
Mm-hmm.
All there is to it. And
well, Ron,
it has to stop.
I couldn't agree more.
Either stop or get it over with. But I don't think we don't have the size force to go after them. Yeah. Western Europe should not want this to happen. They're just now rebuilt from World War II.
Right.
Okay? NATO is reluctant to go. Then what are we going to do? You know, it's really bad stuff on really a lot of different sides, different facets to this prism that we have to worry about.
Well, and you mentioned Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and I believe that what we're seeing is the culmination of decades of poor decision making and lack of real leadership. And so I feel like a lot of folks are wanting to focus in on Ukraine and focus in on policy decisions around that. They don't want to focus on their own individual failures as policymakers and as leaders that led us to this point to begin with. Starting with the education system, as you mentioned.
Very few politicians I know of stood up and said, I failed at this.
Yeah. And that's a big problem to me.
I haven't seen many of those talking points.
Huh? Well, I know I've rubbed a lot of people wrong in the county. I know a lot of folks have viewed my behaviors as being a rebel rouser, but I am deeply in love with this country. Like I said, I didn't grow up here, and I have never in my life heard of an American cheering on the Nazis watching a war movie. But you know what? When I grew up in Turkey, when I was in northern Iraq as a child, not in the military, we would watch these movies that came out of Hollywood, and those people, the Turkish people, are cheering on America because of what we represented, and that doesn't exist anymore. And that's very disheartening to me. So I just hope that people understand that the reason I'm trying to do these things, the reason I'm trying to have these conversations with you, the only reason I got involved in the public sphere is because I feel like we've got to do something, and I can't sit back and be upset that I can't, go fishing with my kids when our country's falling apart. We have an obligation to protect and defend this country.
We do, yay, verily.
So, well, Ron, let's go ahead and wrap this up now. We're at about an hour and a half. But I would love the opportunity to be able to do some more of these, and maybe we can even refine some of the conversations to be more focused based off of maybe some community feedback. But I really, really appreciate your time and your wisdom and your life experiences, and being able to share that with everybody, especially myself, in real time.
Anytime. I have no problem sharing what I think I've learned with others. For them to shoot at, try, or they can toss them, I don't care. Well, it's like I said going in, you're just going to get it straight. I can't figure out how to make much of this very nice.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't like it, I'll attack it. If I like it, I'll embrace it. And if it's in between, I'll think about it.
Well, I like that thought process.
All right.
All right, Ron, I'm going to go ahead and kill us here off, but I appreciate your time again. And
If there's a technical way to do it, send me this thing so I don't get it all messed up. I'm not even sure I've got YouTube on this machine, but I just looked down and saw the button at the end, like read the instructions before you open the jar.
No problem. I'll take care of it and get this to you.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Right, thanks, Ron.
And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know